Keep it together, AJ.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Natty Scene. We are here today for another episode like last time, just this time with a added bit of spice. We've got Ben Howard on the line with me and Lee tonight, and we're going to be probably going into mostly training because I felt like that would be a really cool topic. Ben and Lee have got years and years of experience in the gym, training different ways, making mistakes, learning from them, and I feel like you guys can take a lot from this podcast. You have a lot of young listeners on the podcast that are probably in phases where they've made already some mistakes and potentially can learn from something of these guys' experience, which, I mean, I would have loved a podcast like this when I was like 16, 17 years old. So hopefully we can provide that for you guys and give you a bit more lockdown content. You loved the last one, and I'm really sort of taken back, I'm sure Lee was as well, by the feedback that we got and the views that are on the podcast. I think in total now we're almost over 3,000 across all podcast providers. So
pretty good.
It's a very, very solid episode, and yeah, I'm excited to bring more. So I think first of all, let's go into a little bit of like starting at the back end again, like we sort of did with your story and generally. Let's take it back to when both you and Ben started training, and give us a little bit of an idea as to what that looked like for both of you in terms of where you were training, what methodologies were you believing in, how did you find out how to train, those sort of things. So I'll just let you take away with a bit of story time as always.
Okay, what do we do, Ben? Do we toss a coin to see who goes first?
Yeah, I mean, since you started a good 20 years before me, why don't you start the story?
Okay. Well, like I alluded to a little bit in the last podcast, I started in the bedroom at my mum and dad's house with a York barbell set and a flat and incline bench with a leg extension on it. And my first training program, and it's a really good place to start with this. My very first training program was the one that came on the poster that came with the weight set, and it was a 3-day-a-week full body routine. And I still think now that full body 3 days a week, sticking to the basics, is the most underutilized and the most least often maximized form of training that there is. I stuck with that for a long time. I went on later on to do a 2-way split, and I know that's again quite popular now. The whole upper lower split thing didn't really become a thing back then. We did different things. I picked up a sort of chest, back, shoulders one day, legs and arms the other day. That was a Dorian Yates favourite. I know other people did chest, shoulders, triceps one day with legs, back and biceps on another day, which was slightly brutal. But I mean, back then it was, the pamphlet that came with the barbell set. And then I remember the first, it was the first 9 episodes of Flex magazine that I ever bought. That was pretty much the only magazine that was in the paper shop. And you remember I said last week that I picked up the magazine on the way from the gym one day and opened it up and read it. And they had a 10-part article in there called the Super Teen series. But it was geared around teenage bodybuilders. And I missed the first episode of that and never got my hands on it. But there were training plans and eating plans and stuff in there, and I kind of stuck to that as the Bible and kind of went from there. And I, much the same as whatever town you're born in, that tends to be the football team that you end up supporting, doesn't it? Apart from some, if you're born in Coventry, or if you live in Coventry like Ben and I do, you try and avoid our local team. But when I got into bodybuilding, I kind of gravitated towards our local hero, and of course that was Dorian. And Dorian at the time was just about to compete in his second pro show, which was the 91 Night of the Champions, where he won. And he was sponsored by a local supplement company that was Birmingham based as well. And I kind of, by default, became a Dorian fan, and it's probably the best thing I ever did, because he's been one of the most fascinating and one of the most sort of thought-provoking bodybuilders ever. And from there, I've always, one way or another, since those days, gravitated towards the lower volume, higher intensity approach of training, and that was how it all started for me. Go on, over to you, Ben.
No, that was good. And just out of interest, what was it like growing up in that era? So you started training just as he was getting to the top. So what was it like?
Yeah.
Give us a bit of a...
those days were so different. I'm going to take my spectacles off, by the way, because I am mindful that the light's reflecting off them, but I wanted to keep on at the start of the podcast because I wanted to, as a special tribute to Dave Stracey, the former vice president of the UK, the FBA, I wanted to do my patented double-handed spectacle adjustment. There it is. Make it come off now. He kind of pointed out last week after watching the podcast that I slipped a couple of those in. So that one's for you, Dave. You can't take yourself too seriously, can you? Dorian, I knew nothing about bodybuilding at the time. I went from training in my bedroom to training in that little local leisure centre gym with the local tough guys and sort of power bodybuilder types in there. And then through the Flex magazine, I kind of got wind of the fact that there was this guy Dorian. He was over in Birmingham. Also at the time there was a franchise of Weeder shops. People don't realise this that have only come along in the scene recently, and feeds back to what I said last week about the whole machine that was underneath the IFBB and the Olympia. They had franchise shops, and the nearest one was over in Birmingham. And you'll both know where it was vaguely. It was just across the road from Snow Hill Station, at the top end of Birmingham, near to the Rackhams and Pigeon Park at the top of Birmingham. And I went over there to buy my first supplements. I used to hop on the train and go over to Birmingham and go into the shop and buy my supplements from there. And obviously the guy that ran the shop at the time, a guy called Robert Blakeman, who looked a lot like Sylvester Stallone, so he got the nickname Rocky. He was a competitive bodybuilder on the local level as well. I think he was a friend of Dorian's, so there were pictures of him on the wall. And then when
I saw something about him the other day. I think he's in prison now.
Who, Rocky Blakeman?
I think so.
It'd be a shame. If he was.
Wasn't he a Rocky impersonator as well? Is he the guy that trained at Temple with Dorian?
Yes, that's the guy.
Yeah.
That's the guy. He ended up, when the whole Weeder franchise thing disappeared, he ended up opening a kind of one-on-one personal training studio, but it was very high intensity, Mike Mentor-y, heavy duty bodybuilding orientated personal training, which was in the same place. It was on Snow Hill Queensway. But yeah, it was all just this big alien world. There was no internet. There was no looking at, you didn't feel like you knew anything about anything. And, you walk into this shop and there was a guy behind the counter who probably, walked around at about 15 stone, who to me at the time was an absolute giant. He was a mass monster of a guy. Whereas now, with the greatest of respect to him, you realise that his physique would be 10 a penny in a bodybuilding gym, but I didn't train in one. I didn't know. And it was just this massive, big open playground of discovering new stuff all the time, and you'd learn stuff when it was given to you rather than just accessing it all from a fingertip touch on your keyboard or whatever. And it was really exciting. It was very easy to get engulfed in it, and constantly go out there and look for knowledge and look for ways to learn new stuff. It's weird to think back to those days now. It really is.
Fast forward. Sorry, carry on.
Just to touch on that, Lee, before we move on and I maybe forget what I wanted to ask. Obviously nowadays, especially for me, even since I started bodybuilding in about 2013, 2014, the accessibility of information is vast, and you can just search bodybuilding. You can probably get millions of results on Google, and you could hashtag bodybuilding and find millions of posts on Instagram. What do you think if you were, you know, growing up in this era now, do you think that would be a positive? Do you think you'd learn things quicker and get to where you need to be in terms of effectiveness quicker? Or do you think that for now, it's for younger people, it's maybe a little bit more confusing and a little bit more of a minefield in terms of finding their right way to both enjoy and progress with training?
Easy question to answer. I think it's a minefield. I think it's too confusing. I think it encourages people to run before they can walk. Like I say, you know, that poster, that A3 size poster that went up on my bedroom wall with the 8 or 9 different exercises on it, you know, do 3 sets each Monday, Wednesday and Friday. That's a great foundation. And, you know, you couldn't give that to somebody now and tell them to work off that. They want to go on to, you know, specific, really advanced programs far too quickly. And somebody gave me quite a good euphemism metaphor back in my early days. Is if you took up skiing today, and I don't know much about skiing, but I know ski slopes are colour coded by how difficult they are. You know, if I gave you a pair of skis today and showed you the basics, you wouldn't head for the black slope. And it's true. It's true. There's no way that you would pick up any other sport or any other pursuit and expect to be operated at expert level within weeks or months. But with bodybuilding, everybody wants to complicate things way too quickly. And I think the bigger the pool of information you've got to dip in, the more tempted you will be by human nature to do that.
Just get your thoughts on that, Ben, as well.
Yeah, completely agree. So, I mean, yeah, it's just like if I wanted to run a marathon, I can't even run a 5K. But if I was to run a marathon, the last thing I'd do is the last 12 weeks before marathon training. But it seems to be that from day one, people want to do Mr. Olympia's split. That he's been training 30 years. It's ridiculous. You wouldn't do that in anything. So yeah, I completely agree, and it's exactly where I started as well. Full body training. I trained every day. I had, like Lee, had some weights in my bedroom. Didn't know anything about it. Didn't even take it too seriously. Just knew I enjoyed it. So just throwing around dumbbells every day, 2 or 3 hours in an evening, you know. But it wasn't strenuous. You know, there was no squatting, no deadlifting, nothing like that. And as soon as I moved to a gym, like realised that these exercises done properly, intensely, tear you down, you know. And since then, really, I've never really trained more than 3 days per week. With Lee's guidance as well, you know, as soon as I started to stray away, and then, you know, you always ask me why, Lee. I was, even after, you know, the Worlds, I was like, you know, I'm going to try and, you know, train 4 or 5 days a week. And it doesn't last more than about a month. And then I just revert back to the old faithful, which is 3 hard, heavy training days. No easy days, no arm days, no fluffy, you know, shoulder and, you know, or chest even on its own. It's hard training, full uppers, full lowers, or full body.
Yes, it's interesting you say that, sort of the full circle of coming back to a split that you always love.
Yeah.
Because that's something that I've actually found quite recently since reducing my volume and working at a lower frequency.
Yeah.
I've always thought about, like, I've got this sort of like 2 people speaking to me in my head. One saying, do more, more is better. And then another person is saying, but this is working, you're getting stronger, you know, you're progressing your lift, you're at your strongest ever and you're recovering well. And it's hard to battle both of those voices. And I think obviously for me, I've asked obviously a lot of people and their experiences, and I've spoken to you about training a fair bit, and also having training partners. Like at the moment, in the past I've been training, and up until recently, of course, I've been training with Cuba and with Jimmy, and they've gone through multiple different splits, and they've always come back to the same split, which is pretty much we're training, you know, 4-5 times the max. And I looked through my 2017 logs, and was training 6 days in a row for most of that prep. One day off on a Sunday. And I was a lot weaker. I was training a lot less, like, sub-maximally, so to speak, which is actually something I want to go on to next. And a lot more volume as well. Like, you know, you maybe caught up with some of the lifts I was doing, but it was regular that I would do like a, you know, 4x6 or a 3x10 on a squat kind of thing, as opposed to, you know, the loading set and the back off set that I do now. So it is interesting to see that sort of full circle thing. So one of the things that I did want to ask you about training, amongst many things, is there's a lot of like stuff going around at the moment within the scientific community and the research, suggesting that, you know, volume is one of the main drivers for hypertrophy, and that we must, over the course of a period of time, a training block, perhaps 8 weeks, look to raise our volume incrementally. So, you know, week 1 would do a certain amount of sets, week 2 more, week 3 more, week 4 more, and then take some time off the deload. If anyone else is not aware to what I'm referring to, that's why I'm sort of running through it. Back when you were training, was there anyone else doing this? Was this a training method? Were people going into the gym and purposely leaving reps on the table to preserve their energy and be able to accrue more volume? And what are your sort of both of your thoughts on the training? Maybe Ben, take it first, and then we can get Lee's thoughts after.
Easy answer from me. Nobody half decent. No. I can't think of one competitive bodybuilder, you know, even average bodybuilder, let alone good, that didn't train crazily hard, like scarily hard. And that, you know, if you look at the top 50 natural bodybuilders or drug-free bodybuilders, sorry, Lee, in the world, they, you know, they don't leave reps in reserve unless there's a you know, a reason for injury. They're having to put more volume in. They're having to, you know, superset their workouts for time, whatever it is. That there's no rationale in my view. You know, I'm sure that science backs this up, but science is just an educated guess, you know, and I'm sure it makes sense on paper, but in application, it's those guys, you know, what would Mark Oakes, Rich Gosdecki, you know, every WNBF pro on the top 5, you know, top 5 WNBF pros on stage, they all train the same way. And it's heavy, hard, you know, as hard as they can recover from. It just doesn't make sense to me leaving reps in reserve unless it was for injury prevention. I can't really think of many other reasons to do that. What about you, Lee?
Back when I was serious about my training, I was involved in sort of training to be a competitive bodybuilder. If you left reps in the tank in a hardcore bodybuilding gym, you'd just be called a lazy bugger and you'd be turfed out. Increasing volume over a period of time was a thing, but that was done by
adding weight and reps.
Yeah, adding weight and reps to what you can do, which is the basic, to me, has always been the basic biological science between how you get bigger and stronger. Put more and more stimulus on that muscle and force it to adapt to that stimulus. Leave reps in the tank if you're having a back off week now and again, or if you've been off training for a little while and you're sort of having a break in week to get back into it. But no, I'm not a big believer in training anything less than getting your money's worth out of that trip to the gym and training as hard as you can. And some days you're physically unable to train to your 100%. So if you've only got 70% that day, then that's your 100% for the day. That's what you give. You give everything you've got every single workout. I know you've had that ethos beaten into you for years, Ben, and I know that some of the workouts we've had together have been sick bucket inducing. You know, that we've had some big ones.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. Carry on.
I was just going to say I'm not a big fan of not leaving it all on the field when you play.
No, It just doesn't make sense to me. It's also, and the main reason, it's not enjoyable. It's not what training's about. It's like, taking diet breaks during a contest prep. Yes, on paper it might make sense to recover a little bit, although a lot of this is just, guesswork. For me, it's contest prep or it's not, or it's training or it's not, it's cardio or it's not. There's no in between, because I could get it if somebody likes to train 3 times a day, they can't go all out. So they have to pace themselves. And if that's what they enjoy more than training hard, than going all out, then that's what they got to do. It's better than nothing. But I was lucky enough from day one to be, guided by yourself, guided by, John Harris, who was the WNBF Pro World Champion at the time, Mark Oakes, who was like, I don't know how many British titles he's got now, 5 British titles.
5, yeah.
Yeah, and a couple of world titles to boot as well. These guys were at the top of their game, and they all train the same way, like maximum 2 work sets per exercise to failure, good form. And they all looked the same. They were granite hard, not big in a like, Rich Gosdecki sort of crazy freaky, but on stage, that look that you want to have as a lightweight or a middleweight, crazy, ridiculous, and stood out from the guys that were pumping around lightweights on machines. And you could see the hard work. You could guess. You could be, before I even spoke to Mark Oakes, I knew that he was deadlifting 6 plates aside and benching 4 plates aside. You can just see it. There's no way you can look like that by training light or reps in reserve or whatever. And he still does that now. And he still is a freak now. He hasn't competed for years, but he holds on to it because that muscle doesn't go anywhere. And that appeals to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you, Ben. And another person, and it was a little bit remiss of me, I mentioned him incredibly briefly on last week's podcast, is Damian Lees. Obviously, I mentioned that Damian and I competed together in my first bodybuilding contest. I think it was Damian's second back in '93 when we were both 16. And I've had probably more workouts with Damian than with any other person that I've trained with occasionally. We live at opposite ends of the country, so we haven't been regular training partners, but I've trained with Damo over the years. I've never had an easy workout with him. Never had an easy workout. There's no such thing where we come from. And look at Damian.
I was going to say, you can tell a mile
dense, off. Yeah, density, quality separation in his muscle, a physique that's obviously been built by years and years of toil, and that's how they're built. That's how they're built. And the science, the thing with science in general is that any scientific experiment, if you're going to call it that, is going to be performed against a controlled background. So if you get a guy in a lab and, I don't know, put him in a house for 6 weeks, or a girl, or put her in a house for 6 weeks, to be gender sort of, open-minded on it, and you train them in a certain way, you feed them in a certain way, you rest them in a certain way, that's never a replication of true life. We've got jobs, we've got families. You work full-time, Ben, and you've got 2 young children. I work ridiculously long hours and all weird shifts, and I've got a family that depend on me as well. AJ, you've got your commitments, you've got a job, you've got a partner, you've got a house. The lawn doesn't mow itself. There are other things going on in life apart from this sort of ideal placebo background that these scientific things are done against. And I've always been told from day one, if you've got the energy, use it. Yeah,
that's a good point, actually. And some of the biggest studies that I've seen, the ones that most people are kind of referencing against, I've been done with students that have a 6 months training that may have stuck to the plan, that, they're beginner level, and they would have got results doing anything, I just don't think you can. I've not seen one study out there when there's people training with experience, training extremely hard, and comparing that against people that aren't training hard. So, but
sorry, Ben. I think one of my biggest issues with the whole thing is that a lot of younger trainees are following these people that preach these methods, and they're picking it up like it's their first go at training. And they make this perfect little spreadsheet with how they're incrementing their volume and how many reps they're leaving in reserve in what week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. And they haven't even learned how to train. They don't even know how to train. And I think one of the biggest things that was great about, you know, you guys growing up in your era and how you learned to train was that you learned how to train hard within probably the first 6 months of you being in the gym, in the gym environment with other people pushing themselves to the limit. And unfortunately now, you know, the big chain gyms, the pure gyms, the gyms, you know, 70% of the people in there are probably not training as hard as, you know, you need to train if you want to be a top level bodybuilder. Yes, there's 30% of people that are training probably very hard and doing well, and there's people that come and do our shows and are training in these gyms and look superb. Yeah, you don't have to be in a specialist gym to look amazing. That's not what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is the influence is poorer than it was for you guys. You had great influence. You had people like Dorian to look up to. And yes, there's people now and a great, obviously, influence on the bodybuilding scene in terms of holding on to that Dorian style of training is Jordan Peters, because he's probably got one of the biggest followings as a sort of bodybuilder. Yes, he's not like at the Olympia as a pro, but he's got this authoritative figure. He's been someone that changed a lot of my training, to be honest. And I was that young person who was training 6 days a week and probably a little bit higher volume. And I found Jordan. I was like, geez, this is interesting. And then I looked a little bit more. I was like, okay, so is this a method that you know, just assisted bodybuilders use? Because at that time I didn't really know whether there was differences. Of course, now I'm very much aware that the training is so similar. And then I started looking at, I remember I saw some of John's old YouTube videos in his like gym that he had. I think it was in his back garden or something. It was a big shed. And
the cabin. That's what he called it, the cabin. He had a sign on the wall, the cabin.
He made it himself, didn't he?
I think he built it himself. I think it was like a log cabin kit that he pre-ordered and he built it himself. Yeah, he's moved from that house now. He doesn't have it anymore. Okay. He trains in a big double garage now. But yeah, carry on, AJ. I'm going off track again.
So yeah, I saw some of his videos and I was like, okay, well, he's training in a similar fashion. And then I looked at old logs and interviews that Mark was doing. And I read all of Mark's like training, and it just all sort of like linked up and made a lot more sense. And just like Ben said, you know, I'm a massive believer of the way you train reflects massively in the way you look. And all the people that don't train to that close proximity of failure, that don't focus on getting strong as hell, always look the same. They always look the same. Like they just look like, without sounding harsh, they look like everyone's opinion of natural bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Grainy, soft. Like, yeah, they can get hard, but they just look like a marathon runner when they get hard. You know? And that fucking frustrates me so much, because that's not, in my opinion, what natural bodybuilding should be like. And, you know, when you go to Worlds and you see some of the top guys that do train like how we all kind of train now, the difference is uncanny, and that's what I want more people to be looking like. So, you know, it's doing podcasts like these and putting out content like this that I guess moves more people towards just trying it. You know, at the end of the day, if Ben said as well, adherence and preference is a huge part of what makes your bodybuilding journey great. If you don't enjoy training to failure, if you don't enjoy, you know, those ball busting sets that you get into a leg press and you really sort of second doubt whether you're going to get the rep finished and without blowing your head up, like, if you don't enjoy those sets, then you have to do them, you know.
Yeah.
But,
it's a mindset thing as well, isn't it? You know, it's these guys that are in the off season training that way, looking for an easy option, trying to look at science, what scientific, you know, study has come out now that can make my training easier, make my diet easier in prep when it really matters. that last 8 to 12 weeks when you're really struggling, shouldn't be 8 to 12 weeks, by the way, it should be 4 weeks. You want to be not looking for easy options. You want to be training hard, just embracing it, and just doing what you got to do. Not looking for the latest kind of fad to shy away. So it's more than just training and building muscle as well. It's building character. It's building, it translates outside the gym as well. And your training's got to, you wouldn't go into business going, if I just made a few quid, I'll be all right. Is there an easy way to do that? You'd attack it and give 100%, sleepless nights, and it's got to be the same for training, for family, anything that you really want. It's got to be 100% or nothing.
Yeah. I like to coin the kind of comparison between bodybuilding and track athletics. And if you look at a marathon runner, a marathon runner will run and run and run for hours. They have to. They run marathons. But, we're talking long distance running. We're talking sub-maximal effort, because you can't put everything into every stride of that run because you've got so many of them to save yourself for. Well, you in this life, in many things, end up being what you do. You are a reflection of what you do. And a marathon runner looks like a marathon runner. And a sprinter who comes out of those blocks and gives 100% to every stride for that 100 or 200 meters, or to a degree 400s, they look like sprinters. And, somebody once, a lot of people say bodybuilding's a marathon and not a sprint, but when you apply to adherence and consistency and the time it takes to get to where you want to go, it certainly is a marathon and not a sprint. But if you want to look like a sprinter, train like a sprinter. If you want to look like a marathon runner, train for hours and train maximally. That's always been the theory that I've been brought up on, and I've seen it really go far wrong.
Yeah, love it.
And there's that select few as well, isn't there, out there, like Rich Gozdecki, that can do both. He can train absolute animal heavy, like AJ, you trained with him a few weeks ago, and like freakishly strong, and you think, wow, he's got a good 45 minutes of training like this, and it goes on for 3 hours, and sickening amount of volume, but with weight and intensity, and 6 days a week, and working 50 hours a week, and got a family, and there's a select few out there that can do it all, but we're not all like that.
I mean, that's actually the next topic that I kind of want to go into a little bit. I want to change tack a bit and go into training from a perspective of volume. So we've kind of covered intensity there. So there's bodybuilders out there that are natural, drug-free, sorry Lee, and train with a lot of volume, and some of them look immense. So to coin probably two of the ones that come to my mind, and that is Rich Godzecki and Doug Miller. Those are two that have always stood out as kind of people that go against the grain in terms of what I believe in, and look still that way that we like natural bodybuilders to look: big, hard, full, separated, etc. So obviously give your opinions as to why you think that there's some people out there that can train like that, and I'd be really interested to know if you feel like those people would maybe look better if they did less. I know that sounds like a bit of a dig, because you're maybe going against what they do, and it's obviously worked incredibly well for them, but it's a question I always ask myself, and I tried to almost ask Rich during the session, but I was too busy dieting and trying not to have a cardiac arrest to actually put the question to him. So yeah, you guys take the lead on that.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't see it as a dig at all. You actually stole my punchline there, because that was how I was going to finish. And I've been telling Richard this for years, because again, he lives 10 miles away from me, and I've known him since the first time he ever stepped on stage in a bodybuilding show. I do believe he could be better if he trained more efficiently.
So
that's for a parallel universe, because he's got no interest in doing so. But I wish I could manage Rich's training, and I could probably have I could probably have made him just as good as he is in quicker time or better than he is. I don't know, but I think that he's gone above and beyond what he needs to do in terms of training volume. But it's worked for him, and he looks incredible, and he's got one of the best frames I've ever seen on a drug-free bodybuilder, and probably is one of the most genetically gifted drug-free bodybuilders I've ever met. But we're talking about a guy that is great at every sport that he tries. And I'm not saying he doesn't work hard, because we all know he works so hard. But he fancied being a powerlifter. So he did some powerlifting for a few months. About 4 weeks out from his first powerlifting contest, he didn't even realise that you weren't allowed to wear wrist straps for the deadlift. He didn't even know the rules. He just said, I'll have a go at this. I went to his first British Championships with him, and I was his spotter a spotter and his loading guy in the warm-up area. And he didn't know you had to wear socks up to your knees to deadlift with. He just sort of played at it and still came third in the British Championships, went back the next year and blew everybody away. Got into indoor rowing against guys who were Olympic level athletes and came third in the British Championships. I was at his wedding, and he stole the microphone off the wedding singer and sang All Night Long by Lionel Richie, and it sounded better than the man himself. The guy is a ball of talent. He is an incredibly talented man who knows how hard he has to work to make the best of those talents. And I think, to a degree, people who can train with incredibly high volume and still make the gains with an S, not a Z, that they need to make to be high level bodybuilders are genetically atypical. The first time I ever walked into a gym, I couldn't even bench press an empty Olympic bar off my chest. That was 20 kilos in weight. I'd already been training in my bedroom for 6 months before that, and I hadn't even got to the point where I could bench press 20 kilos. There are other people who try as they might. If their shoulder span is the same as their waist and they've got no clavicle width and they've got wide hips, they're never going to develop a V-taper. Genetics are incredibly important. And when you've got somebody who's such a naturally talented athlete like Rich, to a degree, they don't have to do what's perfect to get the results they need. They just have to work hard, and he does. He works hard at the dinner table. He works incredibly hard in the gym, and whether he could be better doing other things is almost a moot point, because he's got the genetic ability to recover from what he's doing. And that's the basics of bodybuilding, isn't it? That's the basics of hypertrophy is, you apply a stimulus, you recover from the stimulus, and then you overcompensate for that stimulus by growing and or getting stronger. And he's able to recover from that. If I trained 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, I'd be in hospital after a week, or, I'd break or snap something, or more's the point, and this is a really interesting one because it's a little anecdote that I was going to squeeze in afterwards at some point. More's the point, I'd quit after 6 months because I didn't enjoy it. And Rich obviously does enjoy it, which is why he does it. And I've had this conversation with him. He loves training like that, and that's the thing that keeps him enthused and keeps him part of, doing what he's doing, because he loves what he's doing. I had a conversation in the States last year. It wasn't at the Worlds, it was on another trip to the States that I made. Somebody who's got a pretty high profile in the sport said to, sort of recognised me, was having a conversation with me, and asked about Ben, because they knew that I had some hand in helping Ben with his training and, looking after him when he was competing. And they said, so how come Ben Howard only trains 3 days a week? Like it was this big shocker, like it was, oh my God, does he really, I mean, they knew he did, but why does he only train 3 days a week? Almost like they were being critical of what he did. And my answer was typically dry, British and straight-faced, which always goes down well when you're in the middle of the States. I said, well, because he only needs to. You stood on stage with him at the Worlds in 2018, and we all know how that ended. And he's training 3 days a week. If that's, excuse me, if that's what he needs to do, then that's what he needs to do. But I know for a fact, and Ben will probably agree with me, if he started training 6 days a week, he'd probably get sick of it pretty quickly, jack it in, go and play Sunday League football instead, and then the world will have lost one of its greatest natural bodybuilding talents because 6 day a week training wasn't the thing for him and football was just more enjoyable.
I've tried it. I've tried doing 4 days a week. That didn't last long either. It's not, I didn't enjoy it. It's just, it took away from the intensity that I enjoy. That's what I enjoy. You know, I like to be, when I'm walking into the gym, it's either a squat or a deadlift or a press or a row, or, you know, and I need to be fresh for that. If I'm not going to tickle around doing arms or a bit of cardio or fluffing around. That doesn't enjoy me. You know, it's not what I enjoy. But I mean, just going back to your previous point as well, when we were talking about Rich training so much, it's not easy training. Even his arm sessions and his, you know, he'll train, just a few facts to throw out there. He diets on less calories. You know, he competes, 100, 105 kilos on stage. Ridiculous size.
Around about 100 when he's at his best, yeah.
Yeah. And he diets on like 2,500 calories, you know, 200 to 300 grams of carbs all the way through his diet. An hour of cardio a day, he's training 6 days a week, really active job, walking the dog every day, running around after his family every day. You know, he outworks everyone, and that's what keeps him focused. As you said, that if he wasn't, he wouldn't enjoy it.
No. But he's a natural born grafter, and if anybody's ever had the pleasure of meeting his dad is one of the most hardworking blokes I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. You know, a real gentleman, a great guy, you know, proper old school grafter, and that was the way that Rich was brought up. And obviously his swimming background, you know, when he was a teenager, he was
British champion.
Yeah, but that requires you to be getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go to swim for 2 hours before school.
Yeah, as a school kid, like putting, you know, ridiculous.
And that work ethic is just what he thrives on, and he absolutely loves it. And if I genuinely believe if you told him that you're not allowed to do that anymore, you've got to do something that only requires 3 workouts a week, he probably wouldn't enjoy it. Might not do it.
So Ben, actually, whilst we're still on the topic of, you were talking about how you've tried 4 days and you just don't like it. So for people that are trying to work out whether they need to drop down their frequency, what sort of like feelings or emotions or like the way that you approached those sessions where you were doing the 4 or doing the 5, whatever, how did you feel, and what sort of signs do people need to be aware of when they need to pull back their frequency?
So, yeah, well, the obvious ones is little niggles and injuries, which you don't want to pick up. But it's going in demotivated. Even if I train 2 days in a row now, I can go in, not like, oh, I don't want to be here. Of course, I love training. But, you know, after, you know, hitting squats and deadlifts and everything in the session and going in and trying to do some heavy rows, I don't recover from that. So it's like, well, I don't want to just go and use machines and or just do something that's easier. I'd rather do as much hard work as I can. And that tends to be 3 days per week. If things are really, you know, things are going well in terms of like, you know, sleep is going well, no stress, life stresses and stuff, I could probably do 1 week 4, 1 week 3, so every other day. But again, that doesn't last long. All it takes is a string of, you know, the kids getting up at night and or early, you know, shifts, and I'm back to 3 days a week because I can't recover. But yeah, it's just feeling run down. You know, it creeps up on you. You've got little injuries creeping in. I logbook all my sessions and just no progress. In fact, you'll see a decline in strength, sleep quality, stress in general. You just find yourself just kind of a little bit more anxiety, maybe, you know, not enjoying your training just because you know what it's like in the off season compared to pre-contest. That would be a bigger scale. So you go in pre-contest and it's just getting the job done, just trying to maintain muscle is the goal, really, the latter stages. Even if you go in with the mindset of building muscle, probably not going to happen when you're lifting lighter weights than you were a few months ago. You know, in the off season, however, it should be going in feeling like, yeah, I can attack this and this is going to be a new me. It's a new lift. It's a new PB for me, you know, and that's how I want to approach every session. And if I'm not, what am I there for? You know, that's kind of my feeling behind it. But I know you've started training, do you say 4 or 5 days per week now, as opposed to like 5 or 6? How do you feel?
It's pretty much 5 most of the time. In some days it's 4. I think that the main thing that was driving me towards doing that was just fatigue. It's just immense when I was getting as strong as I was getting on most of the movements I was doing, to the point where it would not just ruin like my session, it would ruin my day. Like I wouldn't be able to focus for work. I wouldn't be able to sleep properly. I'd feel that, you know, that anxiety feeling of just basically my body just being in a very sort of fight or flight state in the most simple of ways all the time. And it's not a nice feeling, because you kind of start to build your mindset towards the fact that this is how you should feel. And then you start to speak to other people, and obviously I learned more about what it feels like to be overreached, not overtrained, but overreached. And I was just in sort of like a constant state of battling my body's sort of nervous system. And that's something that I think a lot more people need to take into perspective, is that just because you're maybe, you know, your muscles are ready and you're recovered, and by the next session, it doesn't mean that your nervous system is ready as well. And that arguably, when it comes to like focus and general health, general well-being, is probably the most important thing that you can be aware of. So I think that's why I dropped down the frequency. And I think, you know, it's not to say that people can't get away with training a little bit more frequently when they're weaker and younger, but you're still putting that same degree for training really hard. You're still putting that same degree of sort of like pressure on your body to recover from a nervous system perspective. Obviously you adapt, but still you're training very hard. So I believe that even if you're beginning, you should train that 3 to maximum 5, but you know, 3 to 4 times a week probably be appropriate for most people, from what I've seen so far, and with my clients as well. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I find that as well. 3 days per week, even for beginners, just because you want to make it as sustainable as possible. You know, the amount of people that I see starting out the blocks 5 days a week, you know, it doesn't last long. It doesn't last, very rarely. You know, if someone can train 3 days per week, it doesn't impact their life too much, but they're seeing great results. That snowballs then. And you can always add to that if you wanted to, or if you can recover from that. But I've always tried to, you know, Lee will know this, that I had a stint in my early 20s of I wasn't training. I kind of fell out of love with the sport a little bit. You know, personal life wasn't great, and I picked it back up again with the help of Lee. And I started on 3 days per week, you know, because I knew that I could do that for the foreseeable future. And I can count maybe twice. I've had 2 weeks off in the last 5-6 years, just because I didn't need time off. So you know, it's sustainable. And I think that a beginner should not try and, you know, have training take over their life, you know. So 3 days a week is plenty if you're training properly, if you're training hard. No doubt about it.
Well, variable on what sort of program you're using, of course. I mean, it works for you. You know, everything's down to the individual, but you tend to run either full body workouts or upper lower splits, don't you?
Yeah.
And I know, AJ, you're doing 5 days a week at the minute, but aren't you running a push-pull legs split?
Yes, yeah, I am.
Body part frequency and, you know, the energy expended during workouts is a factor there as well. If you were doing upper lower, you wouldn't be training 5 days a week. If you were training full body, you wouldn't be training 5 days a week. But it's interesting. You've used a word there, Ben, that I have a point that was drummed into me years and years ago that I'll make now, the word beginner. So many people have come to me over the years and said, what's a good beginner's routine? And I tell them the same thing. I tell them what I was taught years and years ago. The beginner is not the routine. The beginner is the person. You know, 25 years ago, there were guys winning national level bodybuilding contests doing full body workouts 3 days a week. Dorian Yates, when he won his IFBB pro card, by winning the British back in the late 80s. It was 88. He won the British. I hope it was 88. If it was 87, I'm going to look really stupid now, but it was one of those two. I'm sure it was 88 he won. He was training 3 days a week, and he was training legs and arms and the chest, back, shoulders split. And he would be running, he'd be training those body parts 3 times over a 2-week period. 4 working sets for chest, 6 for back, 6 for shoulders, basic stuff, squat, leg press, leg curl for his thighs. And that got him to a British title. And most people would look at that and say that's a basic beginner's routine. But the beginner is the person and not the routine that they're using.
Yeah, I love it. I think another thing I wanted to cover was, I'm sure both of you have dealt with this situation. I feel like I'm still growing as a whole, so I've not kind of looked at it too much. And I think that's an important thing that one of you might say. But over the years that you've, been competing and, especially for yourself, Ben, getting to the high echelons of the sport, you will have noticed that you've developed or gained momentum in other body parts more than others. So what's your opinion on weak body part training? And do you think that there's a certain level you have to get to before you start to pinpoint areas that are weak body parts? Like, do you think if, as a teenager and you're, 17, 18 years old, do you think that's the right time to be picking apart weak body parts? Do you think you can still spot imbalances, things that are growing better than others? Or, do you think that's worth waiting for the future? What's your opinion on that?
No, I think if you've got a well-balanced routine and everything's getting hit to a degree, you don't need to start picking anything apart. I always say this to the guys, I've got weak arms, so I've got to batter them, and I'll give them up. But what about their calves? They have a calf day as well, do they? But to gain an inch on your arms, how much are you going to have to gain overall strength-wise? It's going to be a lot, years of training. So I personally, when I won the 2014 UK novice title, I was still training full body 3 days per week. No isolation work for arms, just still trying just to gain strength and mass all over. Even 2016, when I won my pro card, I was training predominantly that way, and then I might add in some curls, some heavy curls, one exercise, and I still train like that now, by the way, one exercise for these small body parts, just trying to get as strong as possible all over, including there. But no, you wouldn't pick apart, hamstrings and do 10 different exercises of hamstrings, but it's a big body part compared to your biceps, So I just don't, again, my mindset with intensity, even if I did 10 exercises, 10 sets for a small body part, it's not any better than doing 2 full-blown sets that are going to, give a message to that body part that it can't refuse but to grow, It's just my mindset, really. But yeah, I wouldn't start looking at weak body parts until you've passed the 5-year mark, at least. Train them. You don't just go in blindly. Train every body part well, but focus more on execution and consistency and the basics before you start trying to trick the body. What do you reckon, Lee?
Lee, before you answer, can I just sort of turn the question a little bit, just to
Sure.
what might give a slightly varied answer? So let's say you're at a show, you're at the table, and there's the teen class comes on, and you see one of the teens walk out, and he's fucking awesome, waist down, but upper body wise, a long way behind. Obviously, balance is huge in bodybuilding. So let's say that person comes second, and he gets beaten by someone with more balance, and he comes to you at the end of the show and says, what do I do to win? And he's got these ginormous Tom Platz looking legs, and his upper body's hanging behind. At that point, he could be 1 or 2 years into his training career. Is the advice still the same as to wait until he's at the 5-year mark then start seeing if the imbalance is still an issue, or is there other things he can think about? Because I've seen different opinions on this. Like, I've seen people say that if you have a strong body part, make it ridiculous, and then wait for everything else to catch up. And then other people say, obviously, focus on the balance whilst it's weak, whilst you can still correct it, kind of thing. What's your thoughts?
So if I was faced with that direct scenario, the first thing I'd tell that guy is to restructure the question, because there's nothing you can do to win a bodybuilding contest. I've seen guys go away from bodybuilding contests, make all the improvements it's been suggested that they need to make in whatever facet that it's been suggested in, come back and place lower, because who's going to turn up on the day? You can't guarantee a win in bodybuilding. We've discussed this, haven't we, Ben, recently about various situations. So I hate giving feedback. I hate giving feedback from the point of view that your result in a bodybuilding contest is variant only on who stood on that stage with you on that particular day. If I were to get into the realms of giving people a pick apart the body sort of analysis of their physique, then I'm not doing the job of a bodybuilding judge anymore. I'm doing the job of a trainer. And there are people out there who've got trainers, but then they come to me for advice on what to do for their physiques. And it makes me wonder how good their trainers are, if I'm honest. And from now, I actually have a policy, and I think it's written into the rules on our website, that after a contest, I'm not going to give you feedback anymore, because you've entered the contest against other people and your placing has been dictated by them, not by me, not by you. So what do I need to do to win is a question that would probably give the kid a headache when he heard the answer to, like it probably just did you. If I was training that kid, if I had a hands-on, and I'd be honest with that guy and say, well, you're bottom heavy, your upper body is nowhere near the level of development of your legs, and the other guy, your legs are a 9 out of 10, your upper body's a 3 out of 10, and his upper and lower were both a 6. So, he beats you on balance. I would have to ask that young man what he was doing training wise, and I would have to use an educated view as a trainer to make sure that their routine was balanced. If somebody's got very heavy, very muscular legs that really are that far ahead of their upper body, then maybe they're not training their upper body hard enough. Maybe they've got some sort of issue that stops them from doing so. I mean, if you look back over the years, some people have got naturally good legs. Some people who've played, I met a guy once who was a very good ice hockey player, so his legs are always really heavily developed. There was a really high-level guy a few years ago who doesn't compete anymore, Peter Chown. He was a BMX rider when he was a kid, and I think he did the stunts and the tricks and stuff like that. He's always had good legs because he was riding a BMX. So there could be things that put you ahead of the game with, say, your leg development or whatever. But somebody who's got that much of an imbalance, their training, we probably need to go back to the point Ben made, which, funnily enough, is probably the same point I would have made. In that if your training is balanced, then your body, to a degree, will be. We're all going to have a weak body part. I've been training for 30 years this year, on and off. And I've never had biceps. I've never had impressive biceps. It doesn't matter whether I do a lot for them or nothing for them. Never had impressive biceps. The body just doesn't want them to be biceps on that side of my arm. My triceps have always been okay, but genetically my biceps are weak. Calves, one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was a piece of Dorian advice. Guy in the gym with weak calves, who was a competitive bodybuilder, asked him, what do I do to get calves like yours? He said, oh, you're not going to. Forget it. Genetics are a thing. His advice to this guy, it was actually the owner of the gym that I trained at for most of my active bodybuilding time. His advice to him was just stop training your calves because they're not growing. It's a waste of your energy. Just leave it. They're always going to be weak. So just leave it. And I love that. I absolutely, but But it's true that, but the guy's calves never grew when he trained them, so why bother? And the same with me. I could never do a great deal to get my calves to grow, so I don't really train them very much. But then they're not that weak. They just never change. I had 17-inch calves when I first picked up a weight, and they're still 17 inches now. But they've never grown over the years. The only thing that ever made my calves grow was jumping rope when I was a kickboxer. I'd skip for 10 rounds 3 times a week, and all of a sudden I got muscle in my calves. Bizarre, and I'm not doing that now. But yeah, again, digressing a little bit. Balance training. Make sure you're working all of the body parts to the appropriate level. Progress with your training. If we're on the training subject, Stuart McRobert. You've heard of Stuart McRobert? He wrote the books Brawn, Beyond Brawn, Further Brawn. And that was basic compound training for genetically typical drug-free bodybuilders and people who want to get bigger and stronger. And he said something, one of his points that he made in those books was something that Ben's touched on. If you want to put an inch on your arms, then focus on being 15 pounds heavier. Focus on bench pressing 50 pounds more than you bench press now. Focus on, strapping weight around your waist when you do chin-ups. That's the way to get an inch on your arms, not to add extra curls.
Cool. I think we've been going for about an hour and a bit now, guys. So should we finish with some listener questions to give some direct value to the audience?
Yeah, let's throw a few out there. And I've actually been sent one for you as well, AJ, that we can touch on if we've got time.
Oh, no. Okay. All right. So first of all, we're going to take one from our resident WMBF pro, Taffy Taylor. So it's actually a really good question. So Taffy, you win. This is the best question we got out of about 25 questions.
Wow.
Not to hate on the listeners, but the rest are quite rubbish. So Taffy, you didn't really win that much of an award here. Not quite as good as the WMBF Pro card. So when and why was your most successful period of training? Both of you.
I think the answer is probably going to be the same for both of us. It'll probably be the first year to 18 months that we trained back in our teens, when we didn't have full-time jobs to worry about, wives to keep happy with endless lists of chores, mortgages to pay, and sleepless nights worrying about all the other stuff that grown-ups have to worry about, when our bodies weren't used to training and adapted to it really, really quickly. That was when I certainly made my fastest progress and probably built 50% of the muscle that I've still got today, which isn't a lot, might I add. But yeah, that's probably been my most productive period of training over the years, was when I very first started. Ben?
Yeah, definitely. You're never going to make as much progress as you are that first 18 months of training. That, as you say, 50% at least of your lifetime worth of gains is made in that time. But I think whenever I go back to bare basics, whenever I scrap junk volume, whenever I, go back to basics, I make huge progress. Even now, I've been lucky enough, a friend of mine's lent me some basic equipment. All I can do is squat and deadlift and press and row. I can't do there's no nice machines to hide behind. And I'm growing now more than I have for years. It's fantastic. So I think any time that you can apply intensity and basics, and just kind of get in yourself within a set, for a period of time, weeks and months, you're going to see great progress. And when you start straying away from that, it's no coincidence that, the progress stops.
But you're also, another key point there, you're also furloughed away from work at the moment.
Yeah, so lots of sleep.
You're not getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and open up the leisure centre, and you're not working 12-hour days, and you're not running classes, and you're not physically as active as you were. So that could.
I was going to say it's like progress. Being a student again now. Like, recovery is great. I'm training when I want. Eat. Yeah, things are as good as they have been for years in terms of training. So I think when you create the right environment, if you can, you're going to see great results regardless. But it's always going to be that first year of training. You're never going to beat that.
Cool. So we have another question from Jack Thorburn. We kind of answered it a little bit, but I'm interested to hear the answer. So obviously you were training before you met Lee, Ben. When you met Lee, did Lee automatically change some of the stuff you were doing, or were you already doing a lot of what Lee's training sort of thoughts were?
Yeah, I mean, well, when I first started training, I don't know if you knew that I found the Natural Muscle Forum, which was John Harris's bodybuilding forum, and Lee was on there. So when I started training, I hadn't met Lee in person, but we'd spoken on there. So it was pretty much from day one, very, very, very early on. It went from the throwing dumbbells around in my bedroom to going to a gym and training correctly from day one. And I knew when I wasn't, it was, I remember there was a period of time, I trained at a gym in Coventry called the Apollo for a year from when I was 16, and have amazing kit, like loads of amazing machines. It's like a museum for bodybuilders almost. And I didn't use any of it. I used to just go in, there was a little walkway downstairs into this tiny little dungeon room, almost the size of a single garage with a squat rack and a mirror. And that's where I used to train. I used to disregard the rest of it because I wasn't interested. I didn't even go and play around with any of that kit. It was just straight down the stairs on my own. It was how it was supposed to be. And that was drilled into me from day one. And there was no interest in even periodizing training. It was just get as strong as possible on these 10 lifts, eat a good amount of food, and gain 50 pounds. Okay, and when you do that, then come and ask some questions. But no, I got some really good guidance from day one, really, thanks to that forum, which is no longer, is it, Lee?
I don't go on it very often anymore. Checked in a couple of times, and it was very quiet. I think the social media sort of platforms that became massive around about sort of 2010, 2011, where he got into Facebook, and then Instagram came along. So the forums died a bit of a death, didn't they? But
yeah.
We had a real sort of brother and sisterhood on that forum, and we're all really grateful to John for giving us that platform to talk and to get to know each other and swap training ideas. And do you remember Eric, who sadly passed away?
Yeah.
Eric, ex-pro wrestler from up in the Lake District, who was on the forum. He'd keep a list of whose birthday was when, because it would tell you on your forum profile information. And every day he'd go on there and post a happy birthday post for somebody. And old legend, great guy. And they were good days, but we used to swap information. And when younger, less experienced guys like yourself would come on the forum, we do our very best to steer you away from getting things wrong. And that was just the way it was then. People wanted to help each other, didn't they? Not for their own self-promotion or any other reason.
Not at all, no. It was almost like an invite to the shows and stuff. You didn't know anything about any of those until you went on something like that. But yeah, I wouldn't be into bodybuilding if it wasn't for that forum. I wouldn't have attended the show, met you. I wouldn't be competing. Definitely not.
Cool. Should we finish up with the question that you've got, Lee?
Oh, yeah. Here's one for you. I'm going to have to put my spectacles back on with another tribute double-handed adjustment for Dave. So there's a question for you, AJ. Well, the best question I got this week, by the way, after the podcast was, what was I drinking during the course of that podcast? Because I've got this rather large beaker here that I drink out of. And everybody thought I was on the ale because I was ranting and raving so much. But no, sorry, I do that sober. Sugar-free Vimto is my poison. Sugar-free Vimto cordial, for those of you who agree. But the question I've got for you, AJ, is it's from last year's British Masters and overall figure champion and World Amateur Masters figure champion, Maria Jorminer. Hello, Maria. And she has asked you specifically via the UKDFBA Facebook page AJ, what, if any, are the differences when you are programming training for people in different categories, i.e. bikini to figure to fit body to bodybuilders? So I think focusing on female divisions, and I've got some great input on that as well for afterwards. I think we'll all have an opinion on that, but the question is aimed directly at you. If you're programming training for a female athlete, basically the essence of that question is your training programming going to change based on what division that athlete wishes to compete in?
Sure. So I think as an overarching answer, like a bit of a wider, broader look at things, it's not a whole lot different, and there isn't too much that changes, especially when you get into the nitty gritty of the programming. There's not a lot that you need to change when it comes to competing in different categories, especially if someone has a balanced program, because amongst all the classes, I mean, you could argue, and obviously if you're looking into men's physique where you are covering the legs, the balance is slightly lesser concern, but still you would like to train the lower half of your body for so many other different reasons, not just the aesthetic side of things. When it comes to females, I definitely think that you can have a little bit more prioritization of volume and frequency for the delts, the glutes, the back, and you can start to drip away your volume which would be in a male program from the chest, and perhaps from some other areas, but realistically you want to be training the legs very similarly. If not, maybe I find that the lower half for females, you can actually hit it with a slightly bigger total amount of volume. They tend to be, females a little bit more type 2 dominant. They can train in higher rep ranges. They can also train across sets a little better than males. So their performance across a 2 or 3 set sort of range would be, so let's say we selected the same weight for 3 sets. A female might actually be able to maintain performance a little bit more cleaner than a guy. I know if I did 3 sets, my reps would come down gradually as I perform the sets, whereas females can seem to sort of extend their volume thresholds a little bit further and keep training close to failure. So in most of my female programs, there is a little bit more volume. What you've got to remember is that, a lot of people will say, oh, well, females are weaker than males, so their volume can be a lot higher. And that's, I don't think, a reason to suggest that their volume needs to be higher, because what I've said earlier about like the nervous system, it doesn't really matter what you're lifting. It matters what you're lifting in terms of the proximity to failure. And for you and for that individual, that weight might be still very, very heavy for you and your nervous system. So I don't think that's necessarily a reason to bump up volume, because most top level figure athletes and even some bikini athletes are actually very, very strong when you compare their numbers pound for pound. Some of them are even stronger than some guys. So the strength relative to their body is pretty vast. I think also the length of time females can train without needing to back off or deload is a little longer than males as well. So tends to be, I've never been a huge fan of programming deloads and saying, okay, week 6, we're deloading. I always sort of wait to get the feedback coming to me that they need a deload. And for you, Maria, that would be like, feeling sort of more fatigue in your sessions, sleep dropping off, having that sort of anxiety feeling, maybe your appetite's dropping off if you're in the off season, niggles, joints and things like that getting a little bit worse for wear. That's really it, to be honest. And obviously the same thought process applied, like we said earlier. If you're still building the basis of your physique, then you should wait until you really sort of see it all to come together as to whether you pick apart areas that might need a little bit more work. And of course, when you step on stage, you'll realize, okay, are my legs where they need to be in comparison to the girls at the top? Do they need to be a bit bigger? Is my upper body where it needs to be? Yeah, that's about it, really. I think I've got a better eye now in terms of spotting the differences between the female classes as well. Obviously, this past year, 2019, with the introduction of Fit Body, it was a year where I was kind of putting my females into both and seeing whether they fit. But now I think I've got a better idea of that, having gone to Worlds as well. And I think it's a complete side tangent. I could tangent all day on it, but I think that's a huge reason why coaches should go to loads of shows, and especially if you want to be coaching the top people, you should be at Worlds every year. And I've been at Worlds every year for the past 3 years main reason is that I love it and I wouldn't miss it for the world. But at the same time, it's a development process for me as a coach. It's being able to tell someone, not that you can't pinpoint whether they're going to win, but you can pinpoint whether they'll be one day maybe at world standard, because I've seen it in the flesh. And other people, I've seen so many coaches, I could go on for a huge run on this. So many coaches say, oh, you could be a world champion, or I'm going to get a pro card. And you haven't even seen what the people look like that are getting pro cards, or what the people look like at worlds that are winning world championships. So how the hell do you think you're going to tell by a photo whether someone's that standard or not? Especially when you're looking at your client photos as well, not them in person. But anyway, that's that question answered. Lee, I'm sure you've got a few things to add in your approaches as well.
No, your answer was fantastic, and it mirrors a lot of stuff. When it came to sort of female focused training, I had a lot of first-hand sort of tuition on how to train females from Ian Duckett, who's arguably, for a long period of time when he was actively doing it, the number one guy when it came to coaching figure athletes and the like. I think his stable of athletes was almost entirely female. And it was through Ian that I learned what you said. I can take a woman to failure on a set of squats, and 30 seconds later she's ready to go again. And I'm thinking, where's all this strength and energy coming from? Where's this recovery coming from? And the reps don't drop off over a course of sets. And I've long believed that women are generally tougher than men in life. Enduring the pain of childbirth for those that can and choose to do it. Getting rid of a cold a lot quicker than men who pretend they've got the man flu. Women are tough cookies. Their bodies are biologically built to be tough. So you can train a woman very hard. I think full body training in particular works exceptionally well for female athletes, more so than males, I would say, because they can recover from it. They can recover from training full body 3 days a week. That was another tip that Ian gave me, and absolutely, he's a mastermind on training. I don't speak to him as much as I should do, but he's taught me a lot over the years. When it comes to different disciplines, again, it goes back to you are the byproduct of what you do kind of thing. And, bikini athletes should look athletic. So I would train them like an athlete, and figure athletes as well. They're structurally different to bikini athletes, mostly in that from day one, I'll look at the natural shoulder width of a female and say, you're not going to be a great bikini athlete because you're going to be big and wide and have that V taper, which isn't what you should be looking for in bikini. The number one difference between training females as opposed to males is I would be far more reluctant to let a female go too far over a contest weight. I always encourage females to stay closer to their contest weight, because that massive drop in weight and the big brutal diet to get there and the effects it would have on your hormones and stuff, you're playing with some dangerous ground when it comes to female athletes messing around with their endocrine system. But on the whole, pretty much mirroring what you're saying as far as female athletes go. AJ, what about you, Ben?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I would always train, as you say, a female full body. They recover so much quicker, not just within the session, but between sessions too. And yeah, exactly what you say. Stay leaner. Don't mess around. I mean, it depends what class they're staying in. We might not have to get as lean as a bodybuilder if they're in a different class. But yeah, just stay leaner, train a little bit more athletically. I do see female bodybuilders that there's a big difference between those that train like a bit fluffy to training really heavy. You can really see that as well, a bit like you can with the guys, but it really stands out with the females, because female training tends to be more geared to like general purpose kind of training. Very rarely do you see a very strong female athlete not have a lot of muscle mass, like an outstanding amount of muscle mass. So, I remember back in the days of max OT training, I don't know if you remember that, but I used to know somebody who trained max OT, and she was huge, head and shoulders above the rest. It was due to heavy training that not a lot of females were kind of, doing at the time. It's very popular now to see females squatting, deadlifting heavy, but it wasn't like that, 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think from a female perspective, like Danny Carr is probably a really good example within our generation that sort of encompasses this whole image of strength and power and that cross-transferring into a physique as well. And I think it's a very interesting point that you covered with regards to stage weight. I think conversely, at the same time, like, I do agree that definitely females should stay that little bit leaner and not have that huge chunk of weight to lose. But I think when you compare it, like in terms of, in proportion to their body weight, they should probably gain a similar amount to males.
Yeah, 10%, something like that.
Yeah, to a degree. I do agree they should stay a little bit leaner though, but at the same time, don't get that twisted if you're a listener and try and stay too lean, because that can just have as much detrimental effect on your endocrine.
Yeah, disastrous.
By staying too close to your stage rate. I mean, obviously, like, my partner Danny has competed. She competed 3 years back to back. I think she learned as a result of that is not a good way to look at competing if you're a female. I think if you're looking at getting fully stage lean, you should look at taking a year out in between competition years as a female, especially if you've done a lot of shows and you've had a busy season. Not that it's not attainable to be able to compete year after year, because I think that some people can do it if they're very smart. But if you're doing long diets and you're having to lose a decent amount of weight, you're going to have to take time off. Otherwise, you're going to experience the long-term effects of affecting things like your thyroid function, your menstrual cycle, and then you'll realize at the end of that, when you've got basically very, very low levels of thyroid and you're having to battle that and trying to find a solution, it's very, very difficult. And if anyone wants an insight into that, Danny did do quite a few videos on YouTube documenting the whole process with basically having to medicate herself. And that was also after going to a coach, who I won't name, going to a coach for the start of the third season, originally wanting an off season with that coach, and then that coach convincing her that it was a good idea to prep when it was not a good idea to prep, and basically forcing an irresponsive body all the way to stage condition, and thus ruining the thyroid function. So if you're a female athlete, don't be afraid to take those years out and work on getting yourself into a healthy position to prep again. Because ultimately, like Lee said in the first episode, there's nothing natural about drug-free bodybuilding.
No, definitely not.
Haven't got T3, T4 to rely on when those things are very, very low at the end of a prep. So, yeah, that's that.
Yeah, got to let it come back to normal. And one final note from me on the female athletes is I tell female athletes from a coaching or from a training and advice point of view, when we're talking about different disciplines in competition, bikini, figure, fit body, bodybuilding, physique, whatever these things are called, but disciplines of varying levels of muscularity, I always tell females, let the division pick you. You don't pick the division that you compete in. A lot of people come to me, I want to do a bikini contest. No, you're going to do no good in a bikini contest. You have too much muscle. Your shoulders are too wide. or somebody will come to me and say, I want to compete in figure. No, you're a bodybuilder all day long. You know, don't, for a female athlete who's looking to get into the competitive side of the sport, be open-minded and let the division pick you. Don't try and shoehorn yourself into a particular discipline because that's the one that you think looks the nicest. Go to the one that suits your body the best. That's why here, in the UK, the FBA, we have 4 different disciplines for females. People don't get the correlation because we have a lot of classes for men's bodybuilding. But in actual fact, for men, we have bodybuilding and we have physique. We have 2 different disciplines. 4 different disciplines because female body types fit into a lot more pigeonholes than men's do. So let the division pick you. Go to where you're suited.
Yeah, that's great advice, because you see a lot of people get very emotionally attached to a class. You know, like, I think even Danny was very emotionally attached to figure when I talked to her at the beginning of 2019. And,
perfect example. Yeah.
I remember saying to her, I was like, you're not going to be figure at all.
No.
And she never really was. She was always too big.
Never.
She was always too muscular.
Mm-hmm.
I think she looked up to someone, and I remember her sending me a photo of her. She was mad, to be fair, but she won DFAT Worlds back in 2015 or something. I think she won WNBF Worlds the same year, and she kind of changed figure quite a bit because she was very big. I've forgotten her name now, but she was very, very good.
It was the girl who won in 15 in Atlantic City, and her name escapes me now. She was way too big for a figure competitor. Yeah. Real deep rib cage, big thick upper body. Oh, what's her name? It will come to me at some point, but I know exactly who you mean because we had a massive debate about that in Atlantic City in 15. And the simple fact of the matter was she won that class because of who she was on stage with, not because she perfectly fit the figure criteria. And if there had been absolute top line, textbook pro figure athletes on stage with her, then she may not have done. But yeah, Danny was the perfect example of that. Incredible structure for bodybuilding, great depth to her physique, just that overall look of strength and power about her. A real warrior woman kind of physique. Wonderful girl, great member of the team at the Worlds last year, and bodybuilder all day long. Stevie Wonder wouldn't put her in the figure class. No offence, Stevie.
No offence, Stevie. All right, guys. Should we finish up there? I think that's
a
point to finish on.
Yeah.
Like to say, as always, thank you very much to everyone that has listened. And we really appreciate the shares and the comments and the likes and things like that. And we will probably hook one up again, hopefully next week.
Love to.
We'll see where things are at. But thanks, Ben. Thanks, Lee.
Thanks for having me on, mate.
Thanks, AJ, for having us on. You're a great host, and I'm glad that it's been useful having us on.
Awesome. Cheers,
Thanks,
guys.
buddy.
And
Nice one.
chat soon.